The courtroom was so silent I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. The sound of the gavel striking wood broke through that silence like a thunderclap. I sat there in the second row, my hands trembling against my purse, my knuckles white. My name is Lillian Moore. I'm 72 years old, and the woman sitting at the defendant's table, the one in handcuffs, her face hollow from years of poison, is my daughter. The young prosecutor standing before her, calm, poised fire in her voice, is my granddaughter, the same little girl I once hid from her mother 25 years ago. When Emma's voice cut through the air, steady, deliberate, it was like hearing justice and grief woven into one sound. Your Honor, the state presents substantial evidence that the defendant, Rachel Moore, led a distribution network across 3 counties. I could barely breathe. Every word she spoke was another crack in the wall I'd built to keep our past buried. I wanted to stand up to scream that this wasn't how it was supposed to end, that I only ever wanted to save her. But what do you say when the child you saved becomes the woman demanding justice against her own blood? I remember the day I chose to lie. The day I took that crying newborn from the arms of a nurse who looked at me with pity and said she doesn't want her. I told them the baby was mine, that Rachel had died in childbirth. I forged papers, changed names, erased my daughter's shame from the world. I told myself I was protecting the child, that one day, when the time was right, I'd tell her the truth. But the truth has a cruel way of waiting patient as rust eating through everything you try to build. And now, it was here, standing in a navy blue suit, speaking with the confidence of someone who believed in the very laws I'd broken. Rachel avoided my eyes as the bailiff read the charges. She looked small, her wrists bound in metal, her voice gone. Once she was beautiful. Once she was mine. I remembered holding her when she was Emma's age, how she'd wrap her arms around my waist and say, "Mom, you always smell like home." I had smelled like lavender and kitchen soap. Now I smelled like guilt. The judge asked Rachel if she had anything to say. Her lips trembled. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "but I'm not sure who I'm apologizing to." The courtroom murmured. Emma didn't flinch. Her tone stayed composed, cold almost, but I knew my granddaughter's voice too well not to hear the tremor hiding underneath. I wanted to run to her to tell her I was proud that she had become everything I dreamed of, strong, fearless, unbreakable. But I also wanted to tell her that she was standing there because of me, because I'd kept secrets that turned love into a weapon. I had raised her to believe the world was fair, that justice always found its way to the surface. I never told her that sometimes justice and love cannot coexist. As Rachel's attorney requested leniency, the judge turned to Emma. Prosecution. Any response? Emma looked straight ahead. The state stands by its recommendation. Her voice didn't shake, but I saw her hand tighten around her pen. It was the same habit she had as a little girl whenever she was scared. For a moment, our eyes met. Just one brief, unbearable second. She looked at me the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray, trying to see inside, trying to understand the damage. She didn't nod, didn't smile. She just looked, and in that look, I saw the child I'd raised the woman she'd become, and the wall between us that neither of us knew how to cross. People think time heals everything. It doesn't. Time only hides the wound under thicker skin. Sitting there watching my daughter and granddaughter on opposite sides of the law, I realized time had only turned our love into evidence proof of what silence can do. When the session adjourned for recess, the courtroom erupted in whispers. Cameras flashed. Reporters swarmed near the doors. The prosecutor and the defendant are related, someone said. Mother and daughter, isn't that wild? I lowered my head, pretending not to hear, but inside me, everything screamed. I never wanted the world to see us like this. I had imagined a very different day, Emma in her graduation gown, Rachel sober and smiling in the audience, and me proud but quiet clapping for the miracle of second chances. Instead, the miracle never came. The addiction took Rachel first, then shame took the rest, and all the lies I told to protect one child ended up destroying them both. When I left the courthouse lobby to breathe, the air outside was heavy with rain. A news van idled by the curb. A young reporter shouted Mrs. Moore, "How does it feel to see your granddaughter prosecuting your daughter?" I didn't answer. How do you explain to strangers that you spent your life trying to rewrite fate only to discover fate was better at writing than you ever were? I sat down on a bench beneath the courthouse steps, raindrops spotting my coat. My hands still shook. My reflection in the wet marble looked like someone else, entirely an old woman who had tried to play God and lost. I thought about the first lie I told, the first promise I broke, and wondered if love that starts with a lie can ever end in peace. And maybe that's why I'm telling you this now. Because no matter how many years pass, some secrets find their way back to the surface. And sometimes, the only way to keep from drowning in them is to confess. So let me ask you something. If you had to choose between saving a life with a lie or telling the truth and losing everything, what would you do? Would you protect the innocent even if it meant breaking the law? Or would you let the truth tear your family apart just to keep your conscience clean? If you think I did the right thing by saving her type 1 in the comments, but if you believe truth should never be hidden, no matter how painful, then hit the like button. I want to know where your heart stands because mine has never stopped breaking. I still remember the night the phone rang, the sound slicing through the quiet of my kitchen like a knife. It was late, close to midnight. The rain was hitting the windows in long, tired streaks. When I picked up, a nurse's voice on the other end said, "Mrs. Moore, we have your daughter here. She's stable now, but you should come." My heart went cold. I had been waiting for that call for months, maybe years. I'd known it would come sooner or later, and I'd prayed every night that it wouldn't mean what I feared most. When I arrived at the hospital, I almost didn't recognize her. Rachel was 23, but looked closer to 40. Her skin was pale and gray, her arms full of small red dots, her hair matted with sweat. There was a plastic bracelet around her wrist and a smell that broke me. Chemical sweet like burnt sugar and smoke. I'd seen addicts before. I'd treated some of them back when I volunteered at the clinic. But seeing that hollow look in my own daughter's eyes, it was something else entirely. The nurse whispered, "She was found in an abandoned lot downtown. Someone called it in. We think she overdosed, but she came through. She's pregnant." The word hit me like a hammer. Pregnant. For a second, I couldn't breathe. How far along, I asked, my voice barely a sound. About 6 months, maybe a bit more. She hasn't had any prenatal care. I stood there staring through the glass at the daughter I used to tuck in at night, the one who once dreamed of becoming a singer. Now her dreams were tangled in IV lines. When Rachel woke up, she wouldn't meet my eyes. Her lips cracked when she spoke. "You shouldn't have come." I swallowed hard. "I'm your mother." She gave a small, bitter laugh. Not for a long time. The nurse tried to interrupt, saying she needed rest, but Rachel waved her off. "You think I'm a lost cause, don't you?" she asked. "No," I said quietly. "I think you're my child, and that means I don't get to give up on you." She turned away, looking out the window into the rain. "You don't understand, Mom. I'm not going to keep it. I can't even keep myself." I wanted to say something, anything but words were useless against the wall she'd built around herself. I reached for her hand, but she pulled it back. "Don't pretend you can fix me," she whispered. "You couldn't even fix Dad." That one landed deep. She knew exactly where to hit. When she was discharged a few days later, I begged her to come home to stay with me until the baby came. "We can do this together," I said. But she shook her head. "Together is what ruined us." Then she walked away down that gray hallway, her steps slow. Her belly barely visible under the hospital gown. I watched her disappear through the automatic doors, each hiss of the sliding glass, feeling like a final goodbye. The next 3 months were a blur of sleepless nights and unanswered calls. Sometimes I'd drive through the bad parts of town, hoping to spot her, terrified that I might actually find her. Once, I saw her standing outside a liquor store arguing with a man twice her size. I stopped my car ready to get out, but before I could, she slapped him and stormed off into the dark. I followed her for 2 blocks until she ducked into an alley and vanished. I sat in the car and cried until sunrise. It was around that time that the first sign of betrayal came not from Rachel, but from the world that was supposed to help her. I went to the social services office, desperate for advice. The woman behind the counter didn't even look up from her computer. "If your daughter's an adult, ma'am, there's not much we can do until she's a danger to herself or others." I wanted to scream that she already was, that she was both, but I knew it wouldn't matter. When the call came again, it wasn't from a nurse. This time it was from the police. "Mrs. Moore, your daughter's been taken into custody. She gave birth 2 days ago at County General. The baby's at the neonatal unit." I felt my legs give out. They said the infant had been exposed to substances, that the mother had disappeared right after delivery, leaving the baby in the hospital bassinet with no name on the birth form. I drove there as fast as I could, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard they cramped. The hospital corridors felt endless, all white and humming. When I reached the neonatal unit, the nurse pointed to a small incubator. "That's her," she said softly. "She's stronger than we expected." I looked through the glass and saw the tiniest human I'd ever seen. Pink, fragile, wrapped in wires and tubes. Her fists were clenched like she was already fighting for her life. I pressed my palm against the glass and whispered, "You're safe now. Sweetheart, Grandma's here." But I wasn't sure I was telling the truth. A social worker appeared beside me, clipboard in hand. "Are you family?" she asked. "Yes," I said quickly. "I'm the grandmother." She glanced down at the chart. The mother didn't list any relatives. "Are you prepared to take custody?" The words came out of me before I even thought. "I'll take her home today if you'll let me." Of course it wasn't that easy. There were forms, investigations, red tape questions about the father. I lied to every single one of them. Said Rachel had died in an accident, said the baby's name was Emma, said I had full guardianship. I knew it was wrong, but when I held that baby for the first time, felt her small body fit against my chest, there was no room left in me for doubt. She opened her eyes then, just for a second. They were the same shade of brown as Rachel's when she was little. I felt my heart split in two, one half mourning the daughter I'd lost, the other already belonging to this new life I'd stolen from the world. That night, I drove home with Emma, sleeping in a blanket beside me. Every mile felt like I was crossing a line I could never return from. I knew the law would call it kidnapping. I told myself it was rescue. And as I pulled into my driveway, I whispered the lie that would define the next 25 years of my life. No one will ever hurt you again. But even as I said it, something deep inside me already knew the world would never let a secret like this stay buried. For the first few years, life was quiet, too quiet, like the stillness before a storm. Emma grew up in my small house on the edge of town, where the mornings smelled of coffee and wet grass. I built our world out of routines: oatmeal for breakfast, bedtime stories every night, soft music on Sundays. She called me Mom before she ever learned the word Grandma. I never corrected her. I told myself it didn't matter what she called me, only that she was safe. But every time she looked up at me with those deep brown eyes, I saw Rachel staring back like a ghost I couldn't banish. The lie became habit. When the pediatrician asked for birth records, I handed over the forged certificate. When the neighbors asked about her father, I said he died in an accident. When Emma started kindergarten, I told the teacher I was a late mother, one of those women who had children in their 40s. She smiled, said I was brave. I smiled back, knowing bravery had nothing to do with it. It was fear, plain and simple. Fear that one day the truth would find its way through the cracks I tried so hard to seal. Years passed, and Emma bloomed like a spring garden, smart kind, endlessly curious. She loved to read, loved to ask questions, especially the kind I didn't know how to answer. "Mom, why don't I have baby pictures like the other kids? Why doesn't anyone ever visit us on holidays?" Each time I'd invent another piece of fiction, weaving a family history out of smoke. Every lie felt heavier than the last, but I carried them because I believed I was saving her. Then one afternoon when Emma was 7, the phone rang. I hadn't heard that voice in years. "Hey, Mom." Rachel said the words brittle, like glass. For a moment I couldn't speak. My chest went tight, the air leaving my lungs. "What do you want?" I finally managed. "I just need to see you. Please." Against every instinct, I agreed to meet her at a small diner outside town. When I walked in, she was sitting in a corner booth, a cigarette burning down in an ashtray, beside a half-empty cup of coffee. She looked older than her years, her hands trembling, her eyes darting around the room like she was being watched. "You look good," she said with a smirk that didn't reach her eyes, still pretending everything's fine. I sat across from her. "What are you doing here, Rachel?" "I heard you've been raising my daughter," she said. My blood went cold. "How did you—" "You didn't think people talk, nurses, social workers, neighbors. You're not as invisible as you think." Her voice was laced with accusation and something worse, jealousy. "She's my child," Rachel said quietly. "You had no right." I clenched my hands under the table. "You left her, Rachel. You walked away." She looked out the window, her reflection pale against the glass. "I was sick." "You still are," I whispered before I could stop myself. Her head snapped toward me, anger flaring in her eyes. "You think you're the hero in all this, don't you? Playing mother to a kid that isn't yours?" She needed someone. And what about me? Did I need someone? Her question hung in the air like smoke, filling the silence between us. For a moment I saw not the addict, but the little girl I used to sing to sleep. My throat ached. "You made your choices," I said softly. Rachel leaned back, a cruel smile tugging at her lips. "You always did think you knew better. You think she'll never find out who I am. You can't keep a lie like that forever." When I left the diner, the world felt heavier. I drove home with shaking hands, staring at the empty passenger seat where Rachel should have been years ago. That night, I locked every door and window. Not because I thought she'd come for me, but because she might come for Emma. Weeks passed, then the strange things started happening. A car idling too long outside the house, footsteps on the porch late at night. An envelope slipped under the door, no letter inside, just a photograph of Rachel standing outside Emma's school. I went cold all over. She'd found us. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, clutching the phone, waiting for the headlights that never came. At dawn, I called the police. They took a report, promised to keep an eye out, but I saw it in their faces they didn't take me seriously. Just another old woman with too much imagination. I pulled Emma out of school for a week, told her she had a bad flu. She didn't understand why she couldn't play outside. "Mom, you're scaring me," she said one night, her small hand on my arm. I forced a smile. "I'm just tired, honey. Everything's fine." But everything wasn't fine. A few days later, Rachel showed up at my door. Her clothes were cleaner, her face thinner but sharper, her eyes sober and hard. She stood there with a half smile that made my stomach twist. "You can't hide her from me forever. Go home, Rachel." "This is my home." "Not anymore." Her smile disappeared. "You're poisoning her against me. You're stealing her love the same way you stole mine." I stepped outside, closing the door behind me so Emma wouldn't hear. "If you ever come near her again, I'll call the police." Rachel leaned in close, her breath sour with nicotine. "You think the truth won't come out. Wait until she's old enough to start asking real questions." She left, and I stood there, shaking the morning sun spilling across the porch like a spotlight on my guilt. After that, I couldn't look at Emma without feeling the walls closing in. Every bedtime story, every birthday candle, I could hear Rachel's voice in my head. "You can't keep a lie like that forever." The breaking point came one evening when Emma was 8. We were baking cookies in the kitchen, flour dusting her nose, her laughter filling the room. Then out of nowhere, she asked, "Mom, do I look like you when you were little?" I froze. The spatula slipped from my hand and hit the counter with a dull thud. I turned toward her, forcing a smile, maybe a little. She laughed again, but I couldn't join her. All I could think of was Rachel's face and how much more Emma resembled her with every passing day. The resemblance was becoming undeniable, something that could expose us both without a word. That night after I tucked her in, I sat in the dark living room and cried quietly into my hands. The truth wasn't just a secret anymore. It was a living thing, breathing through the walls of the house, whispering in every silence. And somewhere out there, I knew Rachel was waiting for the moment it would all come undone. By the time Emma turned 11, the world I'd built for us had started to crack. It didn't happen all at once. It began quietly, like rot beneath the floorboards. First, the neighbors stopped waving. Then whispers followed me at the grocery store. People who used to smile now looked at me with something sharper than curiosity, suspicion. I didn't know it then, but Rachel had started telling her version of the story around town, that I'd stolen her baby, that I'd lied to everyone, that I was a controlling old woman living off guilt. The police came first. A pair of officers knocked on my door one Saturday morning, their cruiser parked in front of my house for everyone to see. Mrs. Moore, one of them said, reading from a clipboard, we received a report of a possible custody dispute involving a minor. My stomach turned to ice. A custody dispute, with who I already knew the answer, a woman named Rachel Moore. She claims to be the child's biological mother. Emma was in the living room coloring quietly on the floor. I could feel her eyes on me. That woman, I said, my voice steady, only because it had to be, is a danger to this child. She's a recovering addict. She abandoned her baby at birth. The younger officer glanced at me with something close to pity. "We'll file the report, ma'am. Just be aware that family court may reach out." After they left, I sat at the kitchen table for hours, staring at the cold cup of coffee in front of me. The lie that had once felt like a shelter now felt like a noose, tightening around my neck. 2 weeks later, a social worker showed up. She was polite, but clinical. Her words measured like a doctor delivering bad news. "We just need to confirm Emma's living situation," she said. I nodded, keeping my face neutral, but inside I was trembling. She asked questions that made my throat close up. "Is Emma aware of her biological parents? Have you ever filed for legal guardianship, ma'am?" I lied again. "Yes, years ago." She made notes, her pen scratching across the clipboard like a clock counting down. When she left, Emma came into the kitchen holding her backpack. "Mom, why were the police here last week? And why did that lady ask about my dad?" I forced a smile, even though my chest felt like it might cave in. "It's nothing, sweetheart. Just paperwork, grown-up stuff." She studied me for a moment the way she did when she sensed something was wrong. She didn't believe me. That night, she stayed up late in her room reading. I stood outside her door listening to the rustle of pages. When she finally fell asleep, I crept in and sat beside her bed. On her nightstand was a school project titled My Family Tree. She had drawn my name at the top and left the spaces for father and grandparents blank. My breath caught in my throat. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. In her careful looping handwriting, she had written, "Who is Rachel?" I stared at it until the letters blurred. I didn't know how she'd found out. Maybe from the social worker, maybe from the whispers, but the truth was no longer something I could keep locked away. I tore the note into pieces and flushed them down the toilet as if destroying the paper could erase the question. That afternoon, I went to the school to pick her up early. Her teacher, Mrs. Keller, met me at the door, her smile tight. "Emma had a rough day," she said quietly. "A woman came by the school. She said she was family." My pulse spiked. What did she do? She didn't come inside. She just stood at the fence. But Emma saw her. My knees went weak. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel until my hands ached. Emma stared out the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. "Mom," she said softly, "that lady at school, she looked like me." I felt the lie crack open in my throat, but I swallowed it down. "It's just a coincidence." She turned to me, her voice shaking. "Why are you lying to me?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. That night, after she went to bed, I sat in the dark living room listening to the old clock tick. Every sound in the house felt amplified. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint whistle of the wind. My mind wouldn't stop replaying the look in Emma's eyes, hurt, confused, almost afraid. The same look Rachel once had when I told her she couldn't go back to her father after he left us. The next morning, there was another knock at the door. It was Rachel. Her face was gaunt, but her eyes were sober and sharp. "You can't hide forever," she said. "I talked to a lawyer." I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. "You're wasting your time." "Maybe, but the truth has a way of crawling out, doesn't it?" She smiled, cruel and calm. Does she even know who she is? I wanted to hit her to make her stop talking, but all I could do was whisper, "Get out of here before I call the police." She turned to leave, then paused at the bottom of the steps. "You can lie to everyone else, Mom, but one day that girl will look in the mirror and see me. And when that happens, she'll hate you for keeping her from me." She walked away, and I stood there shaking, watching her disappear down the street. That night, Emma didn't come to the dinner table. When I knocked on her door, she didn't answer. Inside, I found her sitting on the floor, her backpack open, clothes folded neatly beside it. "Where are you going?" I asked. She looked up at me with eyes that were suddenly older than her years. "You lied to me. You said my mom was dead." My mouth opened, but nothing came out. "I saw her," she said, her voice cracking. "She knew my name. I tried to reach for her hand, but she pulled back. You took everything from me. You didn't save me. You just decided for me." The words hit harder than any slap. "Emma, please, I did it to protect you." "Protect me from what? From knowing who I am?" She stood up, grabbed her bag, and walked past me. I followed her to the porch, my heart pounding. "Where will you go?" "I don't know, but I can't stay here." She left into the night, her small figure swallowed by the darkness. I wanted to chase her, but my legs wouldn't move. I stood there until the sound of her footsteps disappeared. The next morning, all that remained was her half-finished breakfast and a silence so heavy it felt alive. On the kitchen table, she'd left a single line written on a napkin. "I need to know the truth." I pressed it to my chest and sobbed, realizing that the lie I built to protect her had become the very thing driving her away. And somewhere in the distance, I knew Rachel was smiling because she'd finally won. The house felt hollow after Emma left, like the walls themselves had forgotten how to hold sound. Her laughter used to fill every corner. Now there was only silence and the echo of what I'd lost. I checked the front porch every morning, hoping she'd come back. I called every friend she had, every shelter, every hospital. Nothing. Each unanswered call carved another hollow in me. Days turned into weeks. The nights were the worst. I'd lie awake listening for her footsteps, convincing myself that any moment she'd appear in the doorway with tears on her cheeks, saying she was sorry, saying she understood. But the only thing that came was the wind, and sometimes far away a train horn that sounded like mourning. Rachel called once. "You think she's coming back to you?" she asked, her voice hoarse with triumph. "You can't keep pretending you're the hero here. You lied to her mom. You lied to everyone." I hung up before she could say more, but her words stayed circling my mind like flies around spoiled fruit. One evening, about 3 months after Emma's disappearance, I found an envelope in the mailbox. No return address. Inside was a photo Emma standing outside a bus station, her hair tied back, wearing a backpack too big for her small frame. On the back of the photo, in shaky handwriting, were 3 words. She found me. I dropped the photo, my knees buckling. Rachel had her. My first instinct was to call the police, but I stopped myself. How would I even explain it? I wasn't Emma's legal guardian. On paper, she didn't exist as my child. Every lie I'd told to protect her now built a wall between me and the help I needed. So I did the only thing I could. I got in my car and drove, for hours, through back roads and small towns chasing ghosts. I went to every place I knew Rachel might hide: the motels near the highway, the shelters by the old train yard, the crumbling apartment buildings on the edge of the city. At every door I showed the photo, begged for information. Some people turned away. Others recognized Rachel's name and shook their heads. "She's trouble," one man said. "That girl's been hanging around dealers again. If your granddaughter's with her, you better pray she leaves soon." I did pray. Every night, kneeling beside my bed like I hadn't since I was a child. I prayed for Emma's safety, for Rachel's sanity, for forgiveness I knew I didn't deserve. But God was silent. It was late autumn when I saw Rachel again. I'd driven to an old warehouse district after a tip from someone at a shelter. The air was sharp with cold and smoke. She was sitting on the curb, arms wrapped around herself, a paper cup of coffee cooling beside her. For a second, she looked young again, like the daughter I used to braid hair for before school. She looked up as I approached. "Well, look who finally found me," she said, her voice dry. "Where's Emma?" "She left. Said she couldn't stand either of us." My heart sank. "You're lying." Rachel smiled faintly. "Believe what you want. She found out the truth, didn't she? You made me the monster, and now she sees who really is." I wanted to scream, to shake her, to demand she tell me where Emma was, but all that came out was a whisper. "You could have done something right for once." Rachel's eyes softened for a fraction of a second. "Right. You think I don't dream about being right. I wake up every day wishing I could undo it all. But I can't, Mom, and neither can you." She stood, walked past me, and disappeared into the fog. I watched her go, a tiny figure swallowed by the city, and realized I might never see either of them again. 2 months later, winter came hard. I started working part-time again at the local clinic, anything to keep busy. The house stayed cold no matter how high I turned up the heat. I stopped checking the mailbox, stopped cooking for 2. I was learning to live inside the emptiness. Then one evening in late February, the television in the clinic's waiting room flickered to life with a breaking news report. A female suspect had been arrested in a multi-state drug operation. I wasn't paying attention until I heard the name, Rachel Moore. I froze. The reporter's voice was calm, professional. Authorities say Rachel Moore, 48, was one of several individuals involved in trafficking across county lines. She was taken into custody this morning. Sources confirm she has prior convictions for possession and distribution. My coffee cup slipped from my hand, shattering on the tile. The patients turned to look, but I didn't care. My daughter's mugshot filled the screen, her eyes vacant, her hair stringy, her lips chapped and cracked. She looked older than me. "Turn it up," I whispered to no one. The volume rose. Court hearing scheduled for next week. If convicted, Moore could face up to 20 years. I walked out of the clinic without my coat, the cold hitting me like penance. I got in my car, drove to the courthouse, sat outside for hours staring at the building. Somewhere inside those walls, my daughter was waiting for her fate. And somewhere else, maybe far away, my granddaughter was watching the same report, feeling the same ache. The next morning, the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a calm voice said, "Mrs. Moore, this is the district attorney's office. We're calling regarding the upcoming case against Rachel Moore. We'd like to request your testimony as a witness." I gripped the receiver so tightly I could hear the plastic creak. "Why me?" The voice hesitated. "Because the assigned prosecutor believes your perspective will be important. She specifically asked for you." My throat went dry. "Who is she?" The voice softened. Assistant District Attorney Emma Moore. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The world blurred around me. "Did you say Emma?" "Yes, ma'am. She's leading the case." I hung up without saying goodbye. My knees gave out and I sank to the floor, my heart hammering against my ribs. After all these years, after all the lies, the universe had pulled the three of us back together. Mother, daughter, granddaughter, in the most brutal way possible. That night, I sat in the living room surrounded by old photographs. Rachel as a child with a gap-toothed grin, Emma at 6 holding her first spelling bee trophy. I realized I'd spent my life trying to save them from each other, but all I'd done was tie their fates tighter together. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows like it was demanding to be let in. I stared at the phone on the table, waiting for it to ring again, knowing what I had to do. I would testify. I would tell the truth, every word of it, even if it destroyed what little remained of us. Because secrets I finally understood don't just protect, they also poison. And ours had reached the breaking point. The official letter arrived 3 days later. It came in a pale envelope stamped with the seal of the state, the kind of paper that seems to carry weight even before you read it. My hands trembled as I opened it. The words were simple, clinical. "You are hereby summoned to appear as a witness in the state of Maryland versus Rachel Moore." It didn't say anything about Emma, but her presence was everywhere between those lines. I sat at the kitchen table, the morning light spilling across the paper, and felt a kind of stillness that was worse than fear. For 25 years, I'd lived in the shadow of a lie, convincing myself I was doing the right thing. Now I had to face the world I'd built on that lie. That night, I called the district attorney's office. A young receptionist answered and transferred me to an assistant. "This is Mrs. Moore," I said quietly. "I received a summons. I need to speak with the prosecutor." "One moment, please." I heard a click, then a soft intake of breath. "Grandma." My heart stopped. For a moment, I couldn't speak. "Emma," I whispered. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the hesitation under it. "You don't have to call me that here. I didn't know you'd be the one handling her case." "I didn't either," she said, after a pause. "It came across my desk, and when I saw her name..." She trailed off. "I thought it was fate. Maybe it's time." Time for what? For all of us to stop pretending. Her words were like a mirror held up to my life, showing every crack. "Emma, I'm so sorry," I said, "for everything." There was silence on the line for a long time. I could hear her breathing, slow and controlled. Finally, she said, "You'll come to court." "Yes." "Then we'll talk there." The call ended. I sat there with the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone like it was the sound of everything I'd ever loved slipping away. The days leading up to the hearing blurred together. I barely ate. I walked through the house, touching the things Emma had left behind, the little clay bird she'd made in second grade, the ribbon from her high school graduation. Every object was a piece of the life I'd stolen and built at the same time. The night before the trial, I drove to the courthouse parking lot. It was empty, the building rising pale and quiet under the streetlights. I sat there for hours, staring at the doors, imagining walking through them the next day. I thought about Rachel sitting inside, waiting for her sentencing. I thought about Emma standing in front of her, calm and composed, delivering the truth like a verdict. And I thought about myself, an old woman who'd spent a lifetime playing savior and now had to answer for it. The morning of the hearing, I wore the same gray suit I'd worn to my husband's funeral. It still smelled faintly of lavender soap. I didn't wear makeup. I didn't need to look younger. I just needed to look like someone who finally stopped running. The courtroom was smaller than I remembered. There was no crowd this time, only the quiet hum of lawyers whispering papers, shuffling the bailiff, calling out names. Rachel was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit. Her hair had been cut short in jail, her face pale but clear. She looked at me when they sat her down. Her eyes were empty. Not angry, not sad, just empty. And then Emma walked in. She looked like someone carved from glass, sharp, clear, impossible to touch without breaking. She nodded to the judge, adjusted her papers, and for the first time her gaze met mine. There was no hate there, but no forgiveness either. Only purpose. The judge began the proceedings, his voice a monotone that barely seemed real. I barely heard him until he said my name. Mrs. Lillian Moore, please take the stand. My knees trembled as I stood. The courtroom felt colder now. I walked to the witness chair, the sound of my heels echoing through the silence. I took the oath, my hand shaking slightly as I promised to tell the truth I'd avoided for half my life. Emma approached the podium. Her voice was formal, distant. Mrs. Moore, can you tell the court your relation to the defendant? I swallowed hard. She's my daughter. And you also raised her biological child. Yes. Emma nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. Under what circumstances did you take custody of the child? I hesitated, my throat tightening. Rachel was sick. She couldn't care for the baby. I stepped in. Did you have legal authorization? I stared down at my trembling hands. No. The courtroom murmured. The judge raised a hand for silence. Emma's tone remained even. So you took the child without permission? Yes. Why? I looked up at her then. Her eyes were the same deep brown as when she was 5, when she used to ask me if monsters were real. I wanted to tell her that the monsters weren't under her bed. They were standing in the mirror. Because I thought it would save her, I said softly. Because I thought love was enough. Something flickered across Emma's face. Pain maybe, or understanding, but it vanished just as quickly. Mrs. Moore, she continued. Did you ever tell the child the truth about her mother? No. Why not? Because I was afraid she'd go looking for her. And I was right. Emma's lips pressed together. And do you regret that choice? I hesitated. Every day. But if I could go back, I don't know that I'd do it differently. There was a long pause. You could have heard a pin drop. Emma stepped closer, her voice lowering just enough that only I could really hear. You know she hates both of us now, don't you? Tears burned behind my eyes. Maybe hate is the only thing that keeps her from breaking. The judge cleared his throat. Miss Moore, any further questions? Emma looked at him, then back at me. No, Your Honor. She returned to her table, her posture straight, her expression calm. But I saw the tiny tremor in her hand as she picked up her pen. When my testimony ended, I walked back to my seat, my legs numb. Rachel's attorney called her to the stand next. For the first time in years, I listened to my daughter speak without slurring her words. She talked about her addiction, her regrets, her hatred for herself. She looked straight at Emma and said, "You don't have to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But don't hate her for saving you. I would have killed you without meaning to." The words hit like stones. Emma's composure cracked just slightly. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes glistened. The judge called for a recess. Outside the courtroom, I sat on a bench, my body trembling from the weight of it all. The hallway was quiet except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Then I heard her footsteps. Emma stopped in front of me. "You didn't have to tell the truth," she said softly. "Yes, I did." Her eyes filled with tears she wouldn't let fall. "You ruined my childhood to save it." "I know." We sat there in silence for a moment. Then she said, "I don't know what to do with all this." "Neither do I." She looked at me, her voice breaking. "But I think maybe we can start by not lying anymore." I nodded. "That's a good start." When she turned to go, I called after her, "Emma." She looked back. "I'm proud of you," I said, "even if I wasn't always right." She didn't answer, but for a brief second her face softened and I saw the little girl again, the one who used to fall asleep with her head on my lap. Then she walked away, leaving me alone in the corridor with nothing but the echo of her heels fading into the distance. That was the day everything changed. For the first time, the truth wasn't my enemy. It was my punishment and my release. And as I stepped outside into the cold winter sunlight, I realized the storm I'd feared all my life had finally broken. The sky was clear, the air sharp and clean. But peace, I knew, always comes with a price. The night before sentencing, I received a call from the detention center. The officer on the line said Rachel had requested to see me. For a moment, I couldn't answer. My instinct was to refuse. I'd spent so long preparing to face her in court, but not alone, not without the safety of witnesses or distance. Yet something in the officer's tone made me say yes. Maybe I owed her that. Maybe I owed myself that. The next morning, the air was sharp with frost. The prison sat on the outskirts of town, a low gray building crouched under an iron sky. The guard led me through a maze of hallways that smelled faintly of bleach and metal. Every step echoed. Every door clanged behind me like the sound of a closing life. When we reached the visitation room, she was already there, sitting on the other side of a scratched glass divider. Her hands were cuffed, resting on the table. For a second, neither of us spoke. The guard nodded and stepped back, leaving us in a silence so heavy it felt alive. "You look old," Rachel said finally. Her voice was low, almost gentle. "I am old," I replied. She smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. "I thought you wouldn't come." I almost didn't. She leaned forward, studying me like she was trying to see through me. "You were good on the stand. Still the perfect mother, even when you're confessing to a crime." "I wasn't performing," I said. "I was telling the truth." Rachel laughed softly, shaking her head. "Truth, you wouldn't know truth if it looked you in the eye. You built your whole life on lies, and the best part, you convinced yourself it was love." Her words stung, but I didn't look away. Maybe it was both. She leaned back, the chains on her wrists clinking softly. "You know I used to dream about you. Not the way daughters are supposed to. Not about hugs or bedtime stories. I dreamed about strangling you, about screaming at you for every year you made me feel like I was nothing." I felt the air leave my lungs. "Rachel, don't she cut me off? You had your chance to listen 25 years ago." I pressed my palm against the glass. I listened. "I just couldn't let you destroy her." Her jaw tightened. "You think you saved her? Look at what you did. You made her hate both of us." "She doesn't hate you," I whispered. "She's hurt. That's different." Rachel gave a small, bitter laugh. "She hates me, Mom, and she should. I earned that. But she hates you too, and that's the part you can't stand." I closed my eyes for a moment, the weight of her words pressing down on me. When I opened them again, she was watching me with an expression I couldn't read, somewhere between rage and exhaustion. "Do you remember the last time you saw her before you took her?" she asked suddenly. I nodded slowly. "You were lying in that hospital bed. You said you couldn't keep her." Rachel's mouth twisted. "I lied. I didn't want to keep her then, but I thought, maybe later, when I got clean, I thought I'd find her again." "You could have," I said softly. "You just didn't." Her eyes darkened. "Because you made sure I couldn't. You told the world I was dead." The accusation hung between us, sharp as glass. "You were dying," I said. "Maybe not in body, but in every other way that mattered." She laughed again, but it broke halfway through. "You still think you did the right thing." "I don't know what's right anymore," I admitted. "I only know that when I held her, when I saw what you'd left her to face, I couldn't give her back to that life." For a long moment, Rachel didn't speak. Then she whispered, "You think I didn't love her." "I know you did," I said. "But love without strength is just another kind of pain." Her eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. I never stopped loving her. Even when I couldn't remember my own name, I remembered hers. Something in me cracked then. For years, I'd carried anger like armor, convincing myself it was the only way to survive what she'd done. But hearing that, I realized anger had been my addiction too. I leaned forward, my voice trembling. Then prove it, Rachel. Prove it by letting her go now. Let her move on. She looked up sharply. You mean let her hate me quietly while you play the martyr? No, let her heal. Let her be free of both of us. She stared at me for a long time, then shook her head slowly. You really don't get it. She's never going to be free of you, Mom. You're in every story she tells herself. Even when she tries to escape, she'll still be carrying your voice. Her words felt like a curse. We sat in silence for several minutes, the only sound the faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. Then Rachel spoke again, her tone softer. She came to see me, before the trial. My heart stopped. What? She wanted to hear my side of the story. Said she needed the truth before she could stand in that courtroom. I could barely breathe. What did you tell her? Everything Rachel said quietly. How I fell apart. How you took her. How I tried to find her and couldn't. I didn't ask her for forgiveness, I just told her to make her own choice. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. And what did she say? Rachel looked at me then, and for the first time in years, I saw something like peace flicker across her face. She said she understood. That's worse than hate, Mom. Understanding means she sees us both for what we are. The guard appeared at the door. Time's up. Rachel stood slowly, her chains rattling. Tomorrow's sentencing, she said. You'll be there. Yes. She nodded once. Good. Then maybe you'll finally watch me pay for everything your sins, my sins, all of it. As the guard led her away, she turned one last time. Tell her I'm proud of her, she said softly, even if I'm not proud of myself. I wanted to reply, to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. The door closed behind her with a metallic thud that echoed long after she was gone. When the guard escorted me out, the morning had turned gray with mist. The parking lot stretched empty and silent before me. I sat in my car for a long time, staring through the windshield, my breath fogging the glass. I'd gone there expecting anger, maybe even blame. But what I'd found instead was something more unbearable: recognition. Rachel wasn't the only one who had destroyed a life in the name of love. We both had. And tomorrow, when the sentence was read, it wouldn't just be hers that was carried out. It would be mine, too. The day of sentencing arrived under a heavy, gray sky, the kind that makes the whole world feel suspended waiting. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and onlookers, cameras, flashing microphones angled toward anyone who looked like they might know something. I moved through them like a ghost head. Down coat pulled tight around me. Inside, the air was stale with anticipation. I could feel it pressing against my ribs like a second heartbeat. Rachel was already seated when I entered the courtroom. She looked different from the last time I'd seen her, calmer, as if the storm inside her had finally burned itself out. Her hands were still cuffed, but she held herself with a strange kind of dignity, the kind that comes only when you have nothing left to lose. Then Emma walked in. Her black suit was immaculate, her hair pulled back tight, her expression unreadable. But I knew her too well not to see the tension beneath that polished surface. She glanced briefly toward the gallery, saw me, and for a fraction of a second her eyes softened before she turned away. The judge entered and the room fell into silence. His voice was calm but final. This court reconvenes for sentencing in the matter of the state of Maryland versus Rachel Moore. Counsel proceed. Emma stood. Her voice, steady and clear, filled the room. Your Honor, the state recognizes the gravity of the crimes committed: trafficking, possession, and endangerment. These are not small offenses. They have destroyed lives and eroded communities. But today we also recognize the complexity of this case. Her tone changed, slightly quieter now, almost human. The defendant is not a career criminal. She is a woman who fell, who kept falling until there was no one left to catch her, except one person, her mother. A woman who, out of desperation, broke the law to save her granddaughter. That same granddaughter now stands before this court as a servant of the very justice her family once defied. The room held its breath. Even the reporters stopped typing. Emma continued. Your Honor, the state recommends a sentence of 12 years. However, we also ask that 5 of those years be suspended conditional upon the defendant's successful completion of a rehabilitation program. We believe punishment should not just end lives, it should also allow the possibility of rebuilding them. The judge looked at her over his glasses. Are you certain, Miss Moore? This recommendation comes from you personally? Yes, Your Honor. The judge nodded slowly, almost approvingly. Very well. Does the defense have anything to add? Rachel's attorney stood. Your Honor, my client wishes to address the court. Rachel rose, her chains clinking softly in the silence. When she spoke, her voice was low but clear. I've spent most of my life trying to run from who I was. Drugs, men, lies. It didn't matter what I used as long as I didn't have to face myself. But there's one thing I can't run from anymore, and that's what I did to my family. I abandoned my child, I hurt my mother, and I let my own pain become an excuse for everything that came after. I don't deserve forgiveness, but if this sentence means someone out there gets to live, then I'll take it. The judge nodded gravely. Thank you, Miss Moore. He looked down at his notes, then spoke. This court sentences the defendant, Rachel Moore, to 12 years in the custody of the Department of Corrections with 5 years suspended. She will enter mandatory rehabilitation and community service upon release. Sentence to begin immediately. The gavel struck. One clean sound that seemed to split the world in two. Rachel closed her eyes. For a moment she looked almost peaceful. Then she turned her gaze, finding Emma. Their eyes met across the courtroom. No words, no gestures, just the recognition of everything that had been lost between them. Then she looked at me. I saw it there in the faint curve of her mouth, a ghost of a smile, forgiveness, or surrender. I couldn't tell which. The bailiff moved to escort her out. As they reached the door, Rachel hesitated, turning back once more. Her voice carried clearly through the courtroom. Thank you. The judge frowned slightly as if unsure whom she was addressing, but I knew. It wasn't just for Emma, it was for both of us. After she was gone, the courtroom stayed still. The sound of the gavel still echoed somewhere deep inside me. Emma gathered her papers, her professionalism never faltering. But as she stepped away from the table, I saw her pause, her shoulders rising and falling with a long, shuddering breath. I wanted to go to her to hold her the way I used to when she was a child, when the world felt simpler, when pain could still be eased with a lullaby. But I didn't move. Some distances can't be crossed in public. When the courtroom finally emptied, I lingered by the back door. The benches were half lit by sunlight breaking through the high windows, dust motes drifting like ghosts. Emma came out last, her briefcase in one hand, her expression composed again. When she saw me, she stopped. Neither of us spoke at first. Then she said quietly, I didn't do it for her. I know. I did it because if I sent her away for life, I'd become her. Her voice cracked just slightly on that last word. I reached out my hand, trembling. You did what I never could, Emma. You found mercy. She looked at me, then the hardness in her face softening into something fragile. Mercy isn't easy, she said. It feels like surrender. It's not surrender, I whispered. It's strength. We stood there in silence, the weight of everything that had happened pressing between us. Then she said, she asked for a visitor's list. You're the first name she wrote down. My throat tightened. And you? She hesitated. I don't know yet. I nodded. That's fair. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to say more, but then she only said, Take care of yourself, Grandma, and turned to leave. The word Grandma caught me off guard. It had been years since she'd said it out loud. It wasn't forgiveness, not really, but it was a beginning. As she walked away down the courthouse steps, the cameras flashed again, shouting her name, asking questions. She didn't answer. She just kept walking, straight-backed and steady, her face turned toward the gray sky that was slowly beginning to lighten. I stayed behind, sitting on the cold wooden bench, letting the light spill over me. My hands still trembled, but my heart was quiet. For the first time in 25 years, the truth wasn't something I had to hide from. It was out there now, public, undeniable, unchangeable, and somehow that made the air easier to breathe. I closed my eyes and whispered to the silence, let her find peace, both of them. Outside, the clouds began to break, thin streaks of sunlight sliding across the courthouse facade. I watched as the last of the reporters drifted away, their stories, already half written. None of them knowing the real one, the story of 3 women bound together by love, by lies, by the desperate human need to save one another. And as I stood to leave, I realized that maybe the story wasn't ending here. Maybe this was only the part where the healing finally began. The story exploded before the week was over. It started as a small local headline: "Prosecutor sentences her own mother in landmark case." By the next morning, it was everywhere on television, online, in every paper I passed at the grocery store. The photos were always the same: Emma standing before the bench, her face a mask of composure, and me behind her, hands clasped, watching everything fall apart and come together at once. Reporters camped outside my house for days. They wanted interviews, statements, sound bites that could fit neatly into headlines. They wanted to turn our wreckage into entertainment. I didn't answer the door. I stayed inside, curtains drawn, listening to the murmur of voices on the porch, the clicking of cameras, the world trying to define me. Some called me a hero. Others called me a thief. On a morning talk show, a commentator said this woman lied to the government for decades, falsified records, kidnapped a child, and she's being celebrated. Another replied, she saved her granddaughter's life. How can love be a crime? I watched them argue from my kitchen table, their words bouncing around the screen, reducing 25 years of guilt and sacrifice into a soundbite war. The people closest to me didn't know what to say. My neighbor, Mrs. Cole, left a casserole on my porch with a note that said, "You did what any mother would." The clerk at the grocery store refused to look me in the eye. At church, some hugged me, others turned away. It was as if everyone was forced to pick a side in a story they barely understood. Even the pastor mentioned us in his sermon that Sunday. He stood at the pulpit, voice low but steady. Sometimes he said we sin trying to save someone. Sometimes, in our fear of losing what we love, we take the place of God. And the price is always higher than we expect. His words cut deep because they were true. The courthouse became a pilgrimage site for curious strangers. I read an article where a journalist described Emma as the face of moral justice and me as the grandmother who defied the law for love. They made us into symbols, forgetting we were just people trying to survive our own mistakes. One afternoon, a college student came to my door. She couldn't have been older than 20. "Mrs. Moore," she asked softly, "I wanted to thank you. My mom was an addict. I wish someone had fought for me the way you fought for Emma." She started crying right there on my porch. I didn't know what to say, so I hugged her. For the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like I was being punished for what I'd done. It felt like maybe someone understood, but not everyone did. A week later, I received an anonymous letter in the mail. No return address, just a sheet of paper that said, "You're no saint. You stole a life that wasn't yours." I read it once, folded it neatly, and set it in a drawer. The words didn't surprise me. They were the same ones I'd said to myself for years. The conversation spread online. People debated whether mercy had any place in justice. Some called Emma naive, others called her brave. But what struck me most were the messages from mothers and daughters. "Your story made me call my mom for the first time in 10 years," one woman wrote. Another said, "I don't know if I can forgive her, but I think I can try." It made me realize something: the story was no longer just ours. It had become a mirror people used to see their own reflections, flawed, frightened human. A month after the sentencing, a local paper ran a long feature about Emma. The headline read, "The prosecutor who chose both justice and mercy." There was a single paragraph about me at the end. Her grandmother, Lillian Moore, continues to live quietly in the small house where she raised Emma, tending the same garden she once planted to teach her about patience. They got one thing wrong. I didn't plant that garden for patience. I planted it for forgiveness. That same week, I received a letter from Rachel. It was written on thin prison stationery, her handwriting neat and deliberate. "Mom," it began, "I know everyone's talking about us, and I know you hate it. I don't. For once, they're not talking about the worst parts of me. They're talking about what might still be good." Emma came to visit. She didn't stay long, but she said she wants to understand me. That's more than I deserve. She told me you come up in her prayers. I guess that means she's finally finding her peace. Maybe I am too. You can visit if you want. I'll be here a while. R. I read that letter a dozen times before folding it carefully and placing it in my dresser drawer beside Emma's first school photo, the one where she's missing a front tooth but grinning like she owned the world. That night, I sat on the porch, the air thick with the smell of rain and earth. The town was quiet. From somewhere far off came the faint sound of a church bell. I thought about the people still arguing, still deciding whether I was a sinner or a savior. But maybe it didn't matter anymore. The truth was out there now, and truth once spoken has a life of its own. I looked up at the night sky and thought of all the women who had written to me, all the broken families trying to put themselves back together. Maybe that was the real purpose of everything that had happened. Not punishment, not even forgiveness, but connection. A reminder that love, even when twisted and imperfect, is still love. If you're listening to this and you've ever done something wrong for the right reason, tell me, would you do it again? Type 1 in the comments if you think mercy is the real form of justice. Hit the like button if you believe truth should stand above everything no matter who it hurts. Because after all these years, I still don't know which one is right. But maybe you do. The months that followed were quieter than I expected, almost unnervingly so. After the noise, the headlines and the flood of judgment from strangers' silence felt like a gift I hadn't earned. I filled it with small things, watering the garden, baking bread, writing letters I'd never send. Life shrank back to its ordinary shape, but I knew it would never be the same. Every Thursday I drove to the state correctional facility. The first time I almost turned back halfway there. I'd rehearsed what I'd say to Rachel 100 times and still couldn't find the right words. But when she appeared on the other side of the glass dressed in beige instead of orange, her hair tied back, her eyes clear, something inside me loosened. She looked healthier than she had in years. "Hey, Mom," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Hey, sweetheart," I whispered. She smiled faintly. "Didn't think I'd ever hear you call me that again. Didn't think I'd ever get the chance." There was a pause, a quiet that didn't feel hostile anymore. Just heavy with things we both knew couldn't be undone. "I'm working in the rehab garden," she said, her fingers tracing circles on the table. "They've got this patch of sunflowers that won't stop growing. I like it there. Feels calm." "I'm glad," I said. "You always liked flowers." "Yeah," she murmured. "Emma sent me seeds." I blinked. She did. Rachel nodded. "Said they're from your garden. Said they remind her of strength. I planted them last week." The image of it hit me all at once. My daughter planting seeds from the same soil where her own childhood ended. A new garden taking root behind steel fences. "She visits sometimes," Rachel said after a moment. "Doesn't stay long, but she comes. We talk about her cases about law about you. She said she's learning how to forgive people without forgetting what they did." My throat tightened. "And you?" Rachel gave a small shrug. "I'm learning how to live with myself." Maybe that's the same thing. When our time ended, she stood before the guard came to escort her out. "Mom," she said quietly, "thank you for not giving up on me. Even when you should have." I watched her walk away, the chains at her wrists catching the light. For the first time in decades, I didn't see an addict or a criminal. I just saw my child, flawed, fragile, still trying. A few weeks later, Emma came to visit. She parked in the driveway and stood there for a long time before knocking. When I opened the door, she smiled, not the careful, professional smile of a prosecutor, but the small, unguarded one I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. "I didn't call first," she said. "You never have to." We sat on the porch with cups of tea, the garden stretching around us in quiet bloom. She looked at the rows of flowers, the tall sunflowers swaying gently in the breeze. "She told me you come every week," Emma said. "I do." She said, "You two are talking." "We're trying." She nodded. "Good." We sat in silence for a while, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Then she said, "People keep asking me how I could stand there and argue for mercy. They don't get it. Justice isn't about punishing, it's about making sure pain doesn't pass itself down." Her words settled in my chest like something sacred. "You broke the cycle," I said softly. "I couldn't, but you did." Emma looked out at the garden. "I don't know if I broke it. Maybe I just gave it another shape." When she turned back to me, her eyes were bright. She asked me if we could take a picture together when she's released, the three of us. She said she wants proof that we made it. I smiled through the sting of tears. Then I guess we will. We stayed there until the sun dipped low, painting the world in gold. When she stood to leave, she hesitated at the door. "You know," she said, "I still don't know if what you did was right." "Neither do I replied, "but I know I'd do it again." She nodded as if that answer was enough. "I know," she said softly. Then after a pause, she added, "And maybe that's why I'm still here." After she left, I walked into the garden. The air was cool, the earth damp under my shoes. The flowers leaned toward the last of the sunlight. I knelt beside them, touching the soil that had carried all our sins and all our forgiveness. Life had kept growing here even when I thought it couldn't. That night, I sat by the window, the lights of the street flickering outside. I thought about all the versions of us that had existed: Rachel, the lost Emma, the righteous me, the liar who called it love. I realized that none of us were ever just one thing. We were broken and kind, cruel, and loving, guilty, and innocent all at once. And maybe that was what made us human. A few days later, a letter arrived from Rachel. Just one sentence this time. "Tell Emma, I'm proud of her, and tell yourself to stop waiting for permission to be happy." I pinned that letter to the refrigerator right beside Emma's childhood drawing of the three of us holding hands under a crooked sun. The paper had yellowed with age, but the smiles were still bright. For the first time in years, I believed we might still have more story left to live. 3 years passed, seasons came and went the way they do when time stops hurting and simply starts moving again. The world had mostly forgotten our story by then. The headlines faded, the reporters found new scandals, and our names became nothing more than a line in an archive file. But for me, the echoes never left. They just softened into something I could finally live with. Rachel was released that spring. The day she walked out of the correctional facility, the air was bright and heavy with the scent of rain on pavement. I waited for her at the gate with a coat over my arm and a basket of bread in the passenger seat, because that's what mothers do when they don't know how to start over. They bring food as if love can be served warm again. She stepped on through the gate, thinner but steady, her eyes alert, her movements deliberate. There was no dramatic reunion, no tears, no cinematic embrace. She just walked toward me and said, "You drove all this way." "I've been driving all my life," I said. She smiled a small, cautious thing. "Then maybe it's time you stopped." On the way home, we didn't talk much. She looked out the window, most of the drive, the landscape passing like memories too familiar to describe. When we pulled into the driveway, she turned to me. "It smells the same," she said quietly, "like lavender and old wood." "I never changed the soap," I replied. Inside, everything was as it had always been. The same pictures on the wall, the same curtains she once hated, the same old wooden table. Only now time had softened the edges of every argument, every scar. She set her small bag down, looked around, and whispered, "I thought it would feel like a ghost house. But it doesn't." That night, Emma came. I didn't tell her Rachel was home. She just knew the way people who share blood sometimes do. She stood at the threshold for a long time before stepping in. The three of us ended up in the kitchen. No speeches, no apologies, just the clumsy silence of people relearning how to exist together. Emma broke it first. "I brought something," she said, setting down a framed photo. It was from her law school graduation. "We should have one with all of us now." Rachel smiled faintly, still collecting evidence. Emma shrugged. Old habits. We laughed. It was awkward and shaky, but real. After dinner, Emma took out her phone and set it on a timer. We stood together in front of the garden door, the same spot where I'd once watched Emma play as a little girl, where I'd cried the night she ran away. The timer beeped. Rachel's hand rested on my shoulder and Emma stood beside us, her head tilted just slightly toward me. The flash went off, capturing a moment I never thought we'd earn. Later, when they'd gone to bed, I sat alone in the garden. The night smelled of soil and flowers, and the air was cool against my face. The garden had grown wild since I first planted it. The neat rows had blurred into a riot of colors: sunflowers, violets, marigolds, things that didn't match but somehow belonged together. It reminded me of us. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to control life, shaping it into something safe, something clean. But love, I realized, isn't meant to be clean. It's soil under your nails, scars on your heart, forgiveness that grows where nothing should. I looked at the house, at the light still glowing in the windows, and felt a strange peace. For the first time in my life, there was no lie left between us, just the truth, ugly, healing, and alive. In the months that followed, Rachel started volunteering at the rehab clinic near town. She said she wanted to help women who were trying to start over. Emma visited often, sometimes staying for weekends. She helped me build a small legal aid fund in Rachel's name for families torn apart by addiction. They called it the Second Chance Project. I didn't argue with the name. It fit. Sometimes on quiet mornings, the three of us worked in the garden together. We didn't talk much, just the sound of shovels and soil birds somewhere in the distance, and the soft rhythm of breathing in sync. It wasn't perfect. We still had our silences, our scars, but there was something sacred about the way we stood side by side, each of us holding what remained and making it bloom again. One afternoon, Emma found me sitting under the old oak tree. "Grandma," she said, using the word like it belonged to both of us now. "I keep thinking about everything that happened. Sometimes I still get angry. Sometimes I think you were wrong." I said, but then I look at Mom, at us, and I realize maybe wrong isn't the opposite of love. Maybe it's part of it. I reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The hardest part of love, I told her, is letting it change shape. It never really disappears, it just grows into something new. That evening, Rachel joined us. She brought 3 cups of tea and sat quietly for a long time. Then she said, "I used to think I didn't deserve either of you. Maybe I still don't, but I'm glad you never stopped trying." "We all stopped," I said softly. "We just found our way back." The sun dipped low, the light turning golden across the garden. The 3 of us sat there until dusk, the sound of wind moving through the flowers like a whisper that didn't need words. When I finally went inside, I placed the new photograph on the mantel. 3 women, 3 generations standing in front of a garden that had outgrown its boundaries. The image wasn't perfect. Rachel's eyes were red from crying. Emma's smile was small and mine looked tired. But we were together, and that was enough. Now, when I tell this story, I don't call it tragedy anymore. I call it truth. Because the truth is, love isn't what saves us. It's what gives us the courage to save ourselves. If you've listened this far, I want to ask you something. Have you ever hurt someone trying to protect them? Have you ever lied because you thought love demanded it? Tell me, was it worth it? Type 1 in the comments if you believe redemption is still possible even after everything is broken. Hit the like button if you believe the truth, no matter how painful, is the purest kind of love. Because after all I've seen, I still believe love is the only thing powerful enough to survive the truth. And maybe, just maybe, that's what forgiveness really is.